Department of Transportation may choose to retain and distribute images, reports, and or the Q&A transcript altogether. You can type out the questions or ask one verbally. Know that it will be part of the record. So please use both functions for project-related businesses only. Let's move to the next slide. This slide's talked about the diversity in civil rights. If you would like to learn more, you can visit the website on, you see on the screen, which is www.mass.gov/non-discrimination-in-transportation-program, or just visit the, or reach out to the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights. We are all very familiar with this. If you want to raise your hand, the reaction icon at the bottom, and there's a raise hand option there. I want to emphasize here is like with a lot of people online as well as in person, I would like to request that we ask one question at a time and limit it for 2 minutes. And I'll pass it over to the project team.
Thanks, Hung. As I said, we're here for our second task force since we reconvened. Really glad to have you here, and thanks to the Fiorentino Center for hosting us today. The agenda today, which will be reviewed in just a minute, reflects your input. Toward the end of the meeting, we'll be polling you to see what other items that you want to be putting on future agendas. We're going to keep this monthly cadence to keep the conversation going. And as I mentioned last time, we have brought on board through a consultant agreement, Beth Larkin, whom we have worked with before at MassDOT as our task force meeting facilitator. She's done an outstanding job in prior efforts with us, and she runs a great meeting, so we're very happy to have her here. And I'm going to turn over the microphone to her to review today's agenda and continue with the meeting.
Thank you, Louisa. So hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people here in person and also recognize everybody who's joined online. It's great to have you here. I'd like to start with a brief safety minute. So for those of you who might be new to this facility, or for those of you who haven't met in this location in a while, just want to go over in case there's a need to evacuate the building, the two primary means of egress, the front door to Antwerp Street or the back door, primary means of egress, or out the side door, straight out the exit, or halfway down to the left, which is the lobby area, which most of you probably came in through. If there is a need to evacuate, please muster along Telford Street, which is the back of the Star Market parking lot adjacent to the McDonald's. So not to forget the folks who are online. Just as a reminder, it's always great, no matter where you're located, to make sure that you have an emergency plan for evacuation and you know where all your emergency egress locations are. So with that, I just want to reinforce for those who may not have been able to attend or participate in the March task force meeting, that my role as task force facilitator is really centered on these monthly task force meetings. And the goal here is to make sure that the task force continues to be actively engaged in the project going forward, that all voices are heard, considered, acknowledged throughout the project, and ultimately with the goal of, you know, as we go through the environmental approval process, that there is a project that there's a mutual understanding or acceptance and hopefully support for the project that gets advanced through that process. And that's really the goal that, from my talking with everyone, is really focused on, you know, supporting a great project and still working to get there. In terms of the agenda, a couple of things I want to point out. I did get some feedback since the March meeting on how to help streamline these meetings. We are trying to keep them fairly focused within a reasonable time frame for everybody, but also to have the content be primarily topics where there's discussion. So general updates or reporting out of information that's basically one-way directional, we chose to take off of the meeting agenda and send out an advance through general update. That was one of the things that we changed. Second item, in terms of feedback we got from task force members, we had intended to talk about the Grand Junction rail temporary outage as part of this meeting, but some of the feedback we got was it would be better to wait until there's more to discuss in terms of options being considered to address that critical issue. And as opposed to just an interim status report. So that we've moved and intended to cover in May. And then the third thing that I want to highlight is the follow-up. So that's the last piece of the major agenda items. And this is meant to be addressing items that weren't fully responded to in the March task force meeting. And as well as comments that were received in between. So that will largely be, pardon me, information sharing without a lot of discussion for that one item, but that's not to say that that's the end of the conversation. It's meant to be digestible and also revisited in May because we figured that May will probably be heavily weighted to another rail discussion. So that's how we see the agenda going tonight. I do want to say that we do have a couple, I hate to see people in the back when we've got open seats here. So please, anybody from the community or who is here would like to come up, please fill in the spaces at the table. And with that, I would like to kick the presentation over to Rose McCarron with CTPS, talk about our multimodal local street network.
There we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rose McCarron. I'm the manager of project analysis and applications at the Boston Region MPO, also known as the Central Transportation Planning Staff, or CTPS. And I've been served as the project manager of the demand modeling work for the Allston Multimodal project. Today, I'm going to talk through what the travel demand model is, its role in the development of the Allston project, and the results of our demand modeling effort. To begin, I just would like to orient you to where the travel demand model fits into the larger project. So next slide, please. The Boston Region MPO implemented a travel demand model to evaluate the impact of the Allston Multimodal project. The demand modeling process is part of a broad project development and evaluation process. MassDOT worked closely with stakeholders to develop the project design, and the travel demand modeling process takes these proposed project features and develops land use, roadway network, and transit inputs to feed into a project-specific model scenario based on the existing regional travel demand model. Given these inputs, the demand model estimates how, when, and where people in the region travel on an average weekday, given the roadway and transit network availability and capacity. Key model outputs for the Allston project are estimates of roadway volumes and transit ridership. These outputs of the demand model are fed into a focused analysis process using other models that are used to refine the roadway and transit alignment and operations given the estimated travel demand. To be clear, the travel demand model does not predict the future or dictate the Allston project design, but is part of a broader modeling and evaluation process. The primary role of the travel demand model is to estimate travel behavior given the existing and projected future conditions grounded in historical data and an established modeling practice. Next slide, please. Before I talk more specifically about the Allston project, I just want to give you a brief overview of the travel demand model. Next slide. CTPS has maintained a model to estimate average weekday travel behavior in the Boston region for more than 4 decades. Travel demand models are updated every 4 years with each cycle of the region's long-range transportation plan, or LRTP. The LRTP establishes a vision for the Boston region's transportation system. The current model, TDM 23, was developed by the MPO for the 2023 long-range transportation plan called Destination 2050. The previous traveling demand modeling effort for the Allston Multimodal project was completed with a prior iteration of the travel demand model, TDM 19. The current model, TDM 23, is a significant departure from the prior model. TDM 23 is a horizon year of 2050 rather than 2040. It incorporates the latest socioeconomic forecasts developed by MassDOT with UMass Donahue and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And it also includes updated transportation conditions and service plans, like the completion of the Green Line extension and bus network redesign. Next slide, please. But one of the most important advantages of TDM 23 is that it was built to be transparent and publicly available. The result is a travel demand model that is available to anyone upon request. Oh, this sorry. Okay. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, sorry, one of those slides was missing, but oh, back. Can you go back, please? This slide, yes, okay. So if you have questions about how the model works that are not addressed today, the model user's guide and the structures and performance report are available online. And we also have with us today Marty Milkovitz, who's the Director of Modeling and Analytics at CTPS, who led the development of TDM 23 and is available during the discussion to answer questions about the model basis, structure, and its validation process. So next slide, please. Now, so the TDM 23 has been informed by and is validated against a wide variety of data sources. Note that many of these sources are from prior to 2020. The base year of the travel demand model is a 2019 scenario. Due to the disruption of travel during the COVID-19 pandemic, we assume that future travel behavior would be closer to that seen in 2019 than 2021. Next slide, please. The travel demand model development process focused on creating regional projections for future travel behavior. To support this project, we implemented an Allston area-specific travel demand model. Next slide. For the Allston area travel demand model, we start with the long-range transportation plan travel demand model. We use the 2019 and 2050 LRTP scenarios as our starting point. We then use roadway and transit counts collected in the study area and adjust the base year scenario as needed to ensure that it is a close reflection of the existing conditions in this community in 2019. Those adjustments are carried forward into the 2050 scenarios. We then use the study area plans and projections provided by MassDOT and the study team around the development, roadway changes, and transit changes associated with the Allston project to develop build scenarios. The model estimates the travel demand by area, mode, and route for the study scenarios. The major outputs of interest for this study are the number of trips by mode, roadway volumes, and transit ridership. We also evaluate metrics like study area trip generation and estimated study area parking demand to confirm the reasonableness of the model estimates. Next slide, please. So as part of this process, we modeled 3 scenarios. The first scenario is the base year scenario, which reflects existing conditions. The no-build scenario models regional travel demand in the 2050 horizon year, but assumes that the Allston project, West Station, and associated development will not be built. The build scenario includes the roadway, transit, and land use changes associated with the project. We modeled 2 different configurations of the interchange, the 3L and the 3 bridge alignments. These different configurations impact the demand model volume estimates on the local roads, which feed into the traffic analysis study conducted by Tetra Tech. These different configurations do not impact the higher level demand model outputs that I'm going to present here, so I'll only refer to one build scenario in the later output section. Thank you. So looking at the model inputs, here we can see the roadway network as represented by the demand model. Due to the regional nature of the model, it's somewhat abstracted from the actual roadway network. Not every road is represented, and the model does not include operational characteristics like signals or merging. The features of the road network that influence estimated model volumes are the number of travel lanes, roadway capacity, and the anticipated free flow speed. Next slide. On the transit side, the no-build scenario inputs include 30-minute headways on the Framingham-Worcester commuter rail line and implementation of the bus network redesign service plan. The build scenario adds service to West Station on the Framingham local, and it also adds 3 new shuttles that create connections between West Station and other key transit stops and employment centers, and it reroutes MBTA bus route 64 to serve West Station. Transit routes, stops, frequency, schedule patterns, fares, and parking ride lots are represented in the travel demand model network. Operational considerations and constraints, such as the number and capacity of vehicles, the number of tracks available, and other operational characteristics are not. Next slide. land use in the travel demand model is set at the level of travel analysis system, or TAZ. There are five TAZs that are considered to be part of the Allston study area, as seen here on the left. Population, employment, and number of households in the study area are expected to grow robustly from the base to the no-build and from the no-build to the build scenarios. The no-build scenario includes planned developments such as Harvard's renovated athletic facilities and the Enterprise Research Campus. The build scenario adds the proposed Allston Landing development. In absolute terms, each successive scenario shows a similar increase in the population, employment, and number of households. Just grounded in the surveys of travel behavior, the model estimates that an average person makes over 4 trips a day. The specific trip generation rates are sensitive to worker status, age, vehicle ownership, and household income. So the number of households and jobs influence how many trips are generated by and attracted to the study area. So before even running the travel demand model, based on this intensity of development in the no build and build scenarios, we can expect a large increase in travel activity in the study area. Next slide, please. And this does bear out in the travel demand model. We see large growth in trips made by all modes between the base and the no build and between the no build and build scenarios. The magnitude of this growth in trip activity is very similar to the magnitude of the growth in population and jobs. Next slide, please. Looking directly at the growth rates between the scenarios, we see that while the study area population grows by over 180% and the number of jobs by about 170% between the base year and the 2050 no build, the estimated growth in auto trips happens at a slower rate. The number of transit trips in the study area grow faster. This is likely due to transit improvements modeled in the no build scenario, including the increased commuter rail frequency and bus network redesign implementation. Walk trips also grow at a faster rate than auto trips, as increased development in the study area implies that more trips can be accomplished on foot. Similar patterns hold in the changes seen from the no build to the build scenarios. Introduction of new shuttles and commuter rail service to West Station and additional development in the study area support more growth in transit and walk trips. Next slide. Looking at the share of study area trips by mode further reveals these trends. Though the estimated number of auto trips increases with each scenario, the proportion of trips that are made by automobile goes down, particularly between the base and the no-build scenario. We also see increases in transit and walk mode share, particularly from the base to the no-build conditions. Next slide. Looking at the new transit services modeled in the build condition, the travel demand model estimates 1,200 daily boardings at West Station. Across the 3 shuttles connecting West Station to nearby transit and employment centers, we see robust ridership, totaling nearly 20,000 daily boardings on these 3 shuttle routes. And next slide, please. And finally, we'll look at the roadway volumes at a high level. We see the largest growth on I-90 in the base to the no-build condition. This is a reflection of both the growth in the study area and the overall regional population and employment growth between 2019 and the 2050 no-build conditions. Between the no-build and the build conditions, we see the largest growth on the Allston area on the on and off ramps, reflecting the localized increase in development in the study area. And so I'll now turn it over to Mike Hall from Tetra Tech to share how the demand model outputs feed into the traffic analysis.
Thank you, Rose. I hope everyone can hear me. Good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. So CTPS hands off the outputs from the model to the design team. It marks a transition from a broader regional look at the project to a more local focused look at basically at the intersection level. But before we can start that analysis of the intersections in the study area, there is some post-processing of the data that we need to do. First and foremost, we need to convert the volume data from peak period, which is what the model outputs, to peak hour volumes. All of our traffic analysis and queuing estimations are based on 1-hour methodologies. We also have to convert the roadway link volumes that Rose mentioned to actual intersection turning movements, intersection by intersection. And as we do that, we also have to look at the network and how those different intersections fit together, make sure everything is balanced between intersections, it's smoothed out, and this is all part of the process that we do as we make adjustments, looking at each intersection and the network as a whole. And finally, we look at the locations within a study area where there's known capacity constraints, and make sure that those volumes make sense. And if not, there'd be some adjustments would be made. A good example of those would be the River Street Bridge or the Western Avenue Bridge, because there's a finite capacity on those bridges given the number of lanes and the signals on either end. And once we've gone through this process and developed volumes for all three networks, then we can embark on our traffic analysis. And it also presented an opportunity for us. That's the point that we could start to engage with the local street network working group, because we had this information that we could start to talk to them about. So I'm going to pause there for a moment, and I don't know if it's Matthew Petersen and someone else from the city, but I think they're going to speak a few minutes about the working group process. Matthew Petersen from the BTD was the co-chair of that group.
Yeah, I can speak briefly about that, Mike. So sorry, apologies. I'm sick, everyone, so I'm not there in present today, and I believe Chris Osgood is a bit delayed. So the city was co-chair of the working group, and our role in that process was, part of the things that Mike was talking about, reflecting capacity constraints and, making sure that the operating, modeled operations reflected what kind of the city would want to see on the roadways was part of our role there in order to reflect things like, maybe there's places where we're willing to accept more things like left turn restrictions, more things like, slightly longer queues at some times of day, if it means that we can reduce the cross section, because that was one of the overwhelming preferences that we heard from the working group, as you'll see later on. So our role also was to kind of basically be the steward of these roadways when they're built. So a lot of our work has been around kind of making sure that these are roadways the city of Boston can be proud of operating and owning. I think there's still obviously, work to go. This is not 100% design yet, but it's certainly a really good place for us to start. And coming out of the working groups, I think the city of Boston is pretty happy with where we got to from where we started with some 7-lane cross sections on Cambridge Street. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mike, to go over the rest of the process.
Thank you, Matthew. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in the working group process and any environmental documentation going forward, we are evaluating 3 interchange options: 3L, 3L modified, and the 3-bridge option. Next slide, please. Early on in the working group process, we spent some time with the working group talking about travel paths or desire lines through the network, particularly to and from the highway for vehicles. And overlaying all those different travel paths or desire lines started to come into focus which streets we're going to see higher demands and be the pressure points in the system, if you will. So this is a graphic actually we shared with the working group that reflects that. This is again for the 3L modified alternative, and we're going to use the 3L modified tonight as an example. But we did this kind of work for all 3 alternatives and presented all 3 alternatives to the working group. So what you see shaded in blue are based on the traffic analysis, traffic model numbers, are the roadways we're going to see a higher demand and be the pressure points. We also, next slide, went through a similar exercise early on in the working group process to identify where the pedestrian and bicycle travel corridors would be too, and where there will be some pressure for those modes that we want to make, help inform us and make sure that we provide the correct facilities for those users. And where they overlap, so like Cattle Drive and Cambridge Street, that we have competing interests between traffic and pedestrian and bikes. And so extra special care was needed as we developed the concept plans to make sure that all modes are treated equally, and it made this network as safe and efficient as possible for pedestrians and bicyclists as well. So to the next slide, please. And we'll talk a little bit about the concept development for the 3 options. Let's start with the ped and bike facilities. Wherever pedestrian and bicycle travel is allowed, we will have sidewalks on those streets and separated bicycle facilities on all those streets, either a one-way separated bike facilities or a 2-way. And we also provide at intersections separate crossing zones for pedestrians and bicyclists. And when I say where pedestrian bicycle travel is allowed, when you got the chance to review the concept plans, you will not see for example, any kind of bike facilities or or sidewalks or any kind of pedestrian facility on the ramps themselves. Next slide, please. In terms of signal operations that we build into our analysis and will build into our design, for some safety features for pedestrians and bicyclists. For the bicyclists, we'll start there. We're going to have bike signals everywhere, and where we need to, particularly with two-way bikeways, we'll have exclusive bike phases. For pedestrians, we looked at including exclusive PED phases and concurrent lead pedestrian interval phases, LPIs. So the city of Boston has specific guidelines on where exclusive PED phases or LPI should be incorporated into a design. It's actually a calculation. So we went through each intersection for each alternative and determined whether there would be exclusive PED phases warranted there or an LPI, or just more traditional concurrent phasing. So you will see that as you look. Well, you won't see the actual analysis, but we have some summaries that then we'll talk about where the exclusive PED phases will be. Next slide. Concept plans, all three of them, will include bus lanes, exclusive bus lanes along the Seattle Street corridor from West Station up to Cambridge Street. Northbound and southbound bus lanes. At the intersections along that corridor, there'll be either an exclusive bus phase, or we couldn't get an exclusive bus phase, there'll be transit signal priority for the buses. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of the roadways, we were asked at the first meeting of the working group to please start minimal and increase only if you need to. And we did honor that approach. That's how we started for each of the three alternatives. We started with the minimum lanes we thought were necessary, and then tested it out and see where the analysis brought us. If there was queuing or gridlock problems or queue spillbacks to the ramps that could impact the I-90 main line, we then looked at signal phasing or timing as a first level of approach to try and correct the situation. And if that did not work, then we looked at potentially adding lanes where we needed to add them, one at a time, incrementally, and a very iterative process, trial and error to see where we needed to add lanes. And that was our approach throughout. The other thing that Matthew mentioned was also the looking at left turn restrictions. So we looked at that as well. The benefit of looking at those in particular corridors, especially if we think back to the slide which shows where the pressure points were on the north-south corridors for traffic, East Drive and Cattle Drive. Not only do restricting left turns and therefore get rid of the left turn lanes, reduce the cross section, but it simplifies the signal operations and phasing, and that may obviate the need to add either another through lane or an exclusive right turn lane. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So that leads us to the revised concept plans. And I know it's a lot here and it's hard to read at this scale. But we will provide to this group a higher resolution PDFs that you can scan, zoom in on and be able to see the differences. If we had to categorize or simplify the differences between the three alternatives at a high level, it would be how the connections work with the ramp system, and particularly the eastbound ramp system. So for the 3L interchange option, think of it as this full access at the intersection of eastbound off ramp and Seattle Street, and that is full access means traffic can get on the highway eastbound or get off. Next slide. For the 3L modified, that intersection of the eastbound off ramps with the Seattle Street is a partial access. In other words, it's just the only traffic coming up there is just off ramp traffic. The on ramp traffic does not occur at that location. It's been disconnected. And what that allows us to do is on the east side of Seattle Street from West Station up to Cambridge Street South is to site the pedestrian and bike facilities. So in such a manner that you will not have any conflicts with the eastbound off ramp. That intersection is teed up. Thank you. And then if we can skip to the 3 bridge. The difference here is there's no access at the eastbound ramps in Seattle Street. The ramps pass underneath, and then access is provided at Cattle and at East Drive. That change, coupled with the termination of the bypass road at Seattle Street by West Station, results in completely removing any kind of conflicts between activity to and from West Station, whether it's PEDs, bikes, buses, drop-off pickup activity, completely separates those and removes any conflicts with the eastbound ramp system. However, what that does cause is there's some changes to the westbound ramp system connections. The connections lost at East Drive, and we've replaced that in the concept plan with a connection at the west connector, which is further to the west. Thank you. And so as you have a chance to look at these plans more closely, you will see that there's also the network looks very similar, but the number of lanes and different alternatives are slightly different. The 3 Bridge, for example, has more lanes because it took more lanes to keep the queues off the highway. I think with that, go to the next slide, please. We just have an overview, again, using the 3L mod as an example. If we think about where we were before the working group process and the previous modeling and where we are now. Thank you, Hung. In the 3L mod, we're able to reduce at least 1 lane at 13 intersections. An exclusive ped phase or LPI is provided at 13 of the 17 intersections within the network. We also learned that the Cambridge Street bypass road has a positive effect by reducing volumes on Cambridge Street and Cambridge Street South. And for the 3L mod, we ended up restricting left turns at actually about a half a dozen intersections. With that, go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just as a sample, we've got a couple examples here, which you would have seen if you've got the deck earlier. This is a comparison for the 3L mod. On the left panel is the old or previous concept plan for the intersection of Cambridge Street at North Harvard and Cambridge South. And on the right is the new and revised concept plan for this intersection. As you can see, we were able to reduce it by a total of five lanes at the intersection itself. The cross sections have been reduced in total of 5 lanes. At this particular location, the biggest benefit was the Cambridge Street bypass road, taking traffic out of the Cambridge Street eastbound approach. As you can see on the left, there was a double right turn lane because of the size of the volumes. So that underscores the importance on certain aspects of the network of the Cambridge Street bypass road. And I would actually invite everyone here to get on the project website and go to the local street network working group meeting number 4, which was on February 6th. And we have a lot more comparisons between the previous and the new for each of the 3 alternatives, as well as some comparison between alternatives. Much more detail than we have time for tonight. If we can go to the next slide. Just another sample. This is, again, 3L mod. This is the intersection of Cambridge Street South and Seattle Street. Again, the left is the old, right is the new. As you can see, there's some pretty dramatic changes and lane reductions along Cambridge Street South in particular at this intersection. And I would also draw your attention to the lanes shaded in red, and those are the proposed bus lanes north. That's the southbound and then the northbound. Next slide, please. And one more sample, and this is Cambridge Street South at Cattle. And here we were also able to reduce lanes, I think 6 in total. The benefit here was from the Cambridge Street bypass road to a degree, and also restrictions of left turns northbound and southbound. If we go back for a second to the previous slide, if you don't mind, right? So the benefits here were actually came from 3 different sources. One was the bypass road being in the project versus before. The second was restricting northbound left and southbound left turn lanes here. And also the third benefit was that the 3L mod, as you recall, we don't have full access to the eastbound on-ramp system. There is no on-ramp traffic headed south on Seattle Street. So that helped us, that enabled us to reduce the lanes on the Seattle Street legs south of Cambridge Street South. Thanks. And if we can skip to the next slide, the last slide in this series. And just to zoom in for you tonight, you'll be able to see it once you get the higher resolution concept plans, just to show you the busways from Cambridge Street to the north. And these bus lanes are shaded in red all the way to the West Station to the south. And I know they're a little hard to see because of the other red indicating, structure. But I invite you to take a look at the concept plans in more detail when you have a chance. With that, we're pausing here, I believe, Beth, for either questions, or I don't know if anyone else from the city was supposed to do any kind of wrap up after I spoke.
Okay, so sorry, totally.
It was a race.
Again, Chris Osgood, City of Boston. Apologies for being late. I do appreciate the progress that we've made on the local roads. I think overwhelmingly from this group and in the working group sessions, which Matthew was able to co-chair. I think we heard over and over again that local roads should feel like local roads, that they should be minimized in cross-section, they should be vibrant in nature, they should be green in design. I think that we have made progress towards this. I think there's an opportunity for us to think about further alterations, both inside and outside of the Beacon Park Yard area, which can further allow us to have these be the sort of roads that help reconnect Allston. So I appreciate the efforts so far, and the city remains a partner in thinking about operational changes that we can continue to make to allow us to meet the expectations of this group. I don't know if Ben or Matthew, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, and that's just, I think, referring to really a desire from the city side. We're willing to explore. As I said, we're in a better place than where we started. I think from the city perspective, obviously, I think we'd love it if these were all just pedestrianized, but we still have to have a highway here apparently. So I think our goal is that if we are going to have that, we're willing to look at making alterations to traffic operations outside of the project area. Reduce the load on these streets and allow us to contract it without burdening MassDOT with environmental analysis beyond their scope. So that's I think what we're trying to get across there. But yeah, I'll toss it back over to Chris in the room.
Thanks. Hi, Jessica Robertson, Allston resident. Can I ask everyone in the room to raise your hand if you've walked or biked on Cambridge Street in its current form? Okay, we got some catching up to do, but it's pretty good. So if you've walked or biked on Cambridge Street in its current form, you know that it's not fun. And many of you are a little bit newer to the process, but for those of you who were here 11 years ago when we started all of this, the thing that came right before the I-90 process was a different project looking at the Cambridge Street overpass. And we got many people in the neighborhood very activated because everyone agrees that Cambridge Street as it is today is too big and scary. And multiple people have died walking and riding bikes on Cambridge Street. I want to say that again. Multiple people have died. And so I'm really impressed by the progress that we've made, but from the extent that I can tell, zooming in on a low resolution image, Cambridge Street does not have any fewer lanes than it has today, even though we are building a parallel street and another street that's parallel for half of the street. All of the streets surrounding this project area are not getting any bigger. The highway is not getting any bigger. Therefore, I do not understand why we are increasing the number of lanes by 250%, give or take, and we can't make any further improvements on Cambridge Street. So I understand, like, we're moving from slip lanes and cloverleaf ramps to intersections, and therefore that causes more need for car stop at intersections, et cetera. But I really appreciate the progress we've made, but we haven't gone far enough.
Mike, are you on?
I am.
Can you please respond to the, the comment made about the cross-section of Cambridge Street, existing condition versus what's shown as proposed?
Yes, and I can appreciate Jessica's concern, and we have worked as hard as we can to reduce that cross section. However, this is a data-driven exercise. That's what the volumes on that road are such that this is what we need to ensure that we do not have gridlock within the network, and have the queue spill back to the highway. I think it's important to remember that Cambridge Street is a vital artery that connects Allston, Brighton, and Brookline with Cambridge and Somerville. And some of that traffic is unrelated to the highway, and there will always be that connection because of the River Street Bridge. So again, we worked hard. We looked at it a lot. If we could have proposed less, we would have. As someone said, or I think Matthew said earlier, this is we're at the concept level. There's still time, but it is driven by the volumes and the need to be able to store queues between those intersections, because there are closely spaced intersections like between East, Cattle, Stadium, and Seattle. So, but so I'll stop there. I think Matthew, I think might chime in on this a little bit.
Yeah, I can chime in on this. I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of thing where I think the city is, I think, very interested in kind of pursuing what changes we can make on our streets, to the way traffic works outside of the scope of this project so that MassDOT can adapt to it. We understand that there are both outside of the project area as well as within. We did go through several different iterations in the working group process between the working group meetings with MassDOT, looking at different alternatives that looked quite dramatic. Some of them could we make Western Avenue and Cambridge Street a one-way pair? Could we, block traffic over here? Could we stop things over here? Could we really just change around stuff in the interchange? And ultimately, one of the big obstacles is the expansion of the scope of the environmental analysis. So the city, however, is interested in kind of pursuing what we can to reduce the load on this section of the interchange and ultimately allow us to achieve that smaller cross section. Like Jess, that is absolutely the city's goal in terms of what we want to see on Cambridge Street. We want Cambridge Street to be better, friendlier, and more pleasant to be on than it is today. And we will do whatever we can to try to get there in the end.
So this is actually going back to a question I was going to ask earlier about the CTBS modeling, which is, I don't know if we can go back to those slides that showed the output bar graphs. And Harry helpfully forwarded some comments that I made in 2023, and I'm going to make the exact same comments, which is that MAPC did a West Station area study that found that parking provided in Beacon Yards is like the #1 determiner of how many vehicle trips we have. And so I'm very curious about what the parking inputs were for the Beacon Yards build out, because I was very dismayed to see that bar chart, this one, showing that we have 25,000 additional car trips coming to this area, because I don't know how we're going to get them in and out of this area. And I'm certainly glad that I don't drive, because I won't be able to go anywhere in this area with an additional 25,000 car trips. I'm also extremely dismayed to see that the transit trips, while yes, they did increase by 200%, this is an insanely low number considering this area currently has 0 train stations and we are planning to add a train station. And we're only going to get that many more people using transit. That's just really stretches credulity. So I understand, my call, you're saying, we took the outputs from the model and we plugged them into our street network and we saw how many lanes we needed to store all the cars at all the intersections. And this was the best that we could do. But I have a lot of questions about the model and how many cars it fed you to try and squeeze into the street network.
Jessica, I think I'll let CTPS weigh in on the parking.
Yeah, so we actually do have a way to evaluate the estimated parking demand. And these number of trips aren't all happening at the exact same time of day. for the exact same purpose. So the Beacon Park Yards development, there's a proposed 2,600 spaces. And we looked at the estimated parking demand specifically for that development. And the model was estimating that the number of vehicle trips could be supported by that amount of parking. If we had found otherwise, we could have done things in the model to constrain the parking, which would reduce the vehicle volumes. But as it stands, the model was able to, the parking supplied match the demand that we saw in the model.
Parking is that when you build parking, people drive and park. And the whole point of the comment that I made in 2023 is that we don't want as many people to drive here, and therefore we should test a model that has less parking. And the city can maybe weigh in on this, but the city has also got many different climate change and budget goals that are geared towards providing less parking and providing more transit so that people will not drive as much.
And the parking cost, according to an MAPC study, influenced demand for sure.
Yeah, and parking cost is included in the model. We have different parking costs depending on time of day, trip purpose, to sort of think about how people pay differently if they're shopping versus working. And we have to work with the inputs we're given, and the model worked with the constraints that we had. I agree that if you did, constrain parking, it would influence the model results.
Did we do any sensitivity analysis on the parking?
We have done some sensitivity analysis on the parking, yes. And we did see that if you increase the parking cost by about 150%, it would reduce the parking demand by about 45%, or the vehicle trips by about 45%.
If I could just bring up, Mike Paul said we work with the inputs we're given, which were your inputs, and then you said we work with the inputs we're given. So who gave you the inputs?
Well, what I'm saying is we got the proposed parking supply from the proposed Beacon Yards, and the proposed parking supply was 2,600. The model outputs our estimate of the parking demand fit within that number that's proposed within that development.
I think as at least a follow-up, because my own memory is sort of like source to the specific answer question. Like, I think we should just remember where that actually came from. And I think it would be great if there is a sensitivity analysis that has already been done of if we are to change number or change price or change any of those things, how this image on the screen adjusts, because that may be at least helps us all understand some of the policy choices that are in front of us, and then consequently the mobility options that are and the designs that we're going to make. So this is only though looking at one option. We don't have the right.
Okay, I would like to switch over to the online participant, Kayla.
Sure, yeah, we have a couple of hands from task force members joining online. So right now I'm going to go to Bill. Bill, you should be able to unmute your microphone and speak now.
Yeah, hi, great. Thank you, Kayla. Yeah, thanks, Jess, for bringing this up. This is exactly what hit me when I saw this bar chart, is the huge increase in vehicle trips here. And I mean, one is getting at what this is based on. And I think the TDM and parking numbers are certainly a huge influence to this. So I think we absolutely need to go back and relook at those, especially if they're affecting the design of the local street network. So I'd appreciate seeing a little bit more about that. And there was one other point I had. Well, if I think of it later, I'll bring it up. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. It's on. Yeah. Seth Gadbois from Conservation Law Foundation. Thanks for all of this. I have a couple of questions related to this chart, if we could stay on it. I'll just express some general skepticism. This is from a base to build scenario, a annual increase of 10% increase in vehicle trips between now and 25 years from now. And I have a general question of whether that matches reality, and to what extent are policy decisions that we're making, like parking pricing, manifesting that reality in advance. So just, I think that this group outside of this room through common processes, through other communications will definitely question this and the post processes. Two particular questions. Just brought up targets. CLF does a lot of climate stuff. We have at least a general goal to reduce vehicle miles traveled from their projected growth. There is a potential that by the end of this year, ideally, that we will have a hard numeric target. But until that point, we have a general target to reduce trips from what they could have otherwise been. How has that been factored into what we're looking at here or what Tetra and VHB have done in the post side?
Well, I'll start then. I'll let CTPS follow on this chart, but you know, that target. I mean, again, we are working with the numbers that came out of the model. We did post processing as I described earlier, and then I did our best to minimize the roadway network, but we had to ensure a certain level of operations that did not impact the highway. So for us, there really wasn't, that didn't factor in for us.
So if we can go back to the previous slide. So I just want to highlight that there is a tremendous amount of land use being placed in here. So people are going to go there. You know, we do see that the automotive share is going down. People are going there less by automobiles, but there is a large amount of, you know, development happening here, and that's driving a lot of the growth. I will say too, you know, the travel demand model that we use builds off of our long-range transportation plan. And that's really the visioning process for what we think the future is going to look like in 2050. And that's where targets and goals like that would be incorporated. If there's concrete action that we can implement in the model, like we expect there's going to be tolls on the highways or whatever it may be, more higher parking costs, we can implement that in the model and, you know, try to get to where those goals are. But without that concrete assumption in our visioning plan through our long-range transportation plan process, it's difficult for us to incorporate here. But we are currently updating our long-range transportation plan, which will lead to an updated model, and, you know, welcome participation in that to make sure that it reflects what you're asking.
Definitely, we work closely. Yeah.
Questions in the chat. If you have a question online, it hasn't been able to be captured. And I would say anyone in the room who feels as though that they've got a question that there isn't at this point in time to capture, to please write it down if you have a piece of paper and hand it to me. And we want to capture that. Now, Harry's shaking his head. He doesn't like that suggestion, but we do want to get to the Shoreline and Parkland.
So before we leave, Beth, I would like to say the city would like to say one thing here about the model numbers. If you could go to the next slide, please. One of the things here, and this is related to one of the questions I saw posted in the chat, was that the number of trains stopping at West Station, right, is only half of them. It's half the trains, and that assumption is driven by having all the Framingham local stop at West Station. Today, there is a one-seat ride from Worcester to this area. In the future, it would be a two-seat ride with a transfer at Framingham. In addition, the model also, you know, does not, so that means that anyone who is from further west, you know, is going to have a worse trip now than they do today, which maybe explains why 1,200 boardings at West Station is less than the 1,266 boardings that we get today at Boston Landing. And so I think from the city's perspective, I think this really points us towards why, from just looking at what the model shows us and seeing 26,000 extra car trips to the study area and only 1,200 extra trips on the commuter rail, it really does show us why we think that the direction of our planning around the rail should be towards a future where we future-proof for more trains stopping at West Station, for more one-seat rides to West Station and to Kendall Square. And that's really, I think, one of the big takeaways that we took out from this model data, which was one of the first things we saw. So, thank you.
Yes.
Can I add in the question that I don't expect an answer. I appreciate that the TDM in theory doesn't influence design, but what we've heard afterwards is that design is directly tied to these numbers and that there's not much deviation in post. And there's still a lingering question, at least from our standpoint, about how this modeling fits into the design hourly volume of I-90 and those conversations in the throat that, at least from our perspective, are still unresolved.
Thanks. Stacy Thompson, Livable Streets Alliance. Again, thank you for sharing all this information. And I want to echo Jess's words about we have made progress. So I just want to name that. But this is a question specifically for the MassDOT team. And I think this also speaks to a challenge we have in these meetings, which is that we end up rehashing a lot of information again. So what I have heard tonight is that Jess reread feedback she gave at a meeting in 2023. I also reviewed in detail the feedback I gave in July of 2024 that called out these same concerns about the level of transit service, including the 30-minute intervals for the train, the fact that we are assuming no increased MBTA bus service outside of the current bus network redesign, which is not considering West Station many, many months ago. And that was one of many inputs that were received. And I would like to hear from the MassDOT team if any of that feedback was given to CTPS to improve the model based on the feedback we gave you several months ago.
I'm not clear on how the feedback you provided asking for more trips necessarily feeds into the model. They have to.
So for example, an old model had much less transit service, and then we pushed back and said, that seems crazy. And so it was increased to 30 minutes. And I think what we're hearing tonight is based on the projected growth for the region. We would like to hear from the MBTA if there is an intention between now and 2050 to maybe run more than 30-minute intervals of commuter rail service. And I also asked and then directed questions to the general manager after the task force meeting if there was any plan for any increased bus service for this area. Those are inputs we would like included in the model, and we think they're reasonable based on the amount of development that is projected. Those were like very concrete asks I made and did not receive responses for. And I would just name some of what we're hearing tonight are concrete specific asks related to the model that we have been asking for 18 months, 2 years. And I just want to understand what happens afterwards, because I think it will help with the meeting cadence and conversation if we can understand where that information is going instead of rehashing the feedback.
I will defer to the T on the service, but I have not heard that the T intends to increase. I know they're increasing the service to 30-minute intervals. And I also heard, so making the request doesn't necessarily change the reality of policy making. And I also heard an important point made by Rose that land uses are driving a lot of these trips that are causing concerns, and altering the model doesn't necessarily change that reality, but I will defer to the T on whether there are any planned service changes.
Thanks.
I don't know if this is a good time, but I did see a hand from Councilor Breedon, who's joining us online. So Hung or Beth, if this is a good time, I think I'd like to give the floor to the councilor.
Yes.
Great. Councilor Breedon, you should be able to unmute your microphone now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's there in person. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you all this evening. I'd like to just amplify the issue, my concerns about the transit projections. I feel that if we increase the capacity for car traffic, it's sort of almost just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when Boston Landing opened, it met its target for ridership in about a quarter of the time that was expected. So I think if we improve our transit service, our bus service, and a high frequency rail service, then that takes away the need for people to commute in cars on the highway. And I really feel that that's, you know, ultimately where we should be going and, you know, I'm not a transit planner. I plead ignorance, but I think the other thing to bear in mind is that in the immediate area in Allston Brighton, we did an inventory of the number of parking spaces that were in process and pipeline of projects that had were being constructed or in the pipeline, and we had 14,000 parking spaces. So there's a lot of other, apart from Beacon Park Yards, there's a lot of other areas that are going to drive traffic as well, and it's a little discouraging to think that that everyone's going to arrive in the neighborhood by car, and that we're not really putting some intentionality into thinking about transit. 2050 is not that far away. It's 25 years, but you know, I think even in 10 years, 15 years, this is not going to be built in 10 years, but I think by 2050, if we'd follow the model of other European cities and just thinking more about transit options rather than single occupancy cars is what we're going to get. And there's only so much roadway that we can that can accommodate all of that. And that's my basic comment. It's exciting to think about all the possibilities here, but I would love to emphasize transit. Thank you all.
Is this on? Okay. Hi there. My name is Laura Gilmore. I am here with the MBTA, and I believe a couple of my colleagues from our railroad ops team are also on virtually. So if there's specific questions about the commuter rail operations, we can also kick it to them as the experts. I just wanted to flag that later in the meeting, we do have a slide where we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the projected service levels in the future. So Stacy, I think that is probably the point where we can really dive in and roll up our sleeves a bit more on the question that you're asking. And I'm just thinking it may be helpful to have that slide handy. And I know that at the next meeting, we're also intending to talk more about some of the transit infrastructure that supports the improvements that that we want to make. You know, I think from the T's perspective, we certainly want to see, you know, robust transit service to this area. We will talk more when we get to those slides about some of the improvements that we are making in service. And I also just want to flag that, you know, and Rose, I think you can probably also speak to this, that in addition to the commuter rail service here, what is built into the modeling is a fairly robust shuttle service. And that, you know, the reality is that bus planning is flexible. It is done on a different time scale, but that, you know, I think those numbers do speak to, you know, a pretty large growth in transit ridership.
And I know we have to move on, but I think that you're echoing sort of what I said many months ago, which is because bus planning is flexible and cheaper and faster, could we not be planning for more robust transit services if we're not quite sure how we're going to hire those operators and buy those buses? Because we're making lots of assumptions about layover that also doesn't have a budget or timeline or actual trains. So like, when are we leaning into building for the future we want, and when are we dealing with the constraints we have, right? I want to name that. So I know we have to move on, and I will end there.
And so that's a good point to wrap on, because talking about service projections again, it will be a near-term future topic that also gets raised. Again, anybody who's online, remote, anybody here who has a question that didn't get asked, please write it down. We would like to make sure that it's captured. I am trying to keep track of things that, you know, have been specifically requested. So suggesting sharing the outputs from the sensitivity analysis specific to the parking constraints. I just want to acknowledge that that's something that has been requested. So in terms of a somewhat open item, I would, Chris, like to move on, because I think there's a lot of interest also in the Shoreline and Parkland as well.
Good evening. My name is Mark Fulbert, Tetra Tech. Can you hear? Thank you. Environmental permitting and the NEPA process. Jim, can you go to the first slide? Thank you. So here's the existing shoreline out there at the Charles River. These are the state wetland resource areas. There's land underwater, bank, and the most important one in this case is bordering land subject to flooding. That's located between elevation 2 and 3.5. Any fill within that area is going to require mitigation, and we'll have to create flood storage, and we plan on doing that in the park area, which David will talk about later. The riverbank itself is stable. It's got a riprap toe. There's no vegetated wetlands jurisdictional for either state or federal located along the river. And most of it is tree of heaven, which is an invasive species, along with a nuisance species, which is the false indigo bush. And DCR has put a lot of effort into eradicating the false indigo bush because it blocks the views of the river. So that's something we'll also be keeping an eye on. There's also about 15 stormwater outfalls that discharge into the river along the throat area, and that's all untreated stormwater today. Next slide, Jim. This just gives a quick overview of where we've been and where we're going as far as reducing impacts to the river. We at the Worcester main line, there were some track clearance offsets were reduced, so we gained 2 feet there. It was a big effort into reducing the cross section of all the infrastructure. I-90, we went from a 4 foot to a 2 foot shoulders. That was another 4 feet we were able to gain. I-90 itself went from 12 foot lanes to 11 foot lanes, another 8 foot reduction. And finally, and most recently, Soldiers Field Road has gone from 11 to 10 foot lanes, thanks to the DCR. And that represented a 4 foot reduction of the cross section. This has allowed the infrastructure to be located outside of the roadway infrastructure to be located outside of the river. The only fill, the park improvements are the only thing that we need to put fill in the river for. And here is the proposed, this is the at grade. What you see there is in green is the fill. There's approximately 37,000 square feet of fill required. Again, all associated with park improvements or shoreline improvements. There's also about 9,000 cubic yards of dredge. As you can see, it varies in width as you go down. It's about 40 feet wide. At its widest part, the amount of fill. It's a bit of an irregular shoreline, which gets straightened out. And you have less fill at either end of this. So there's a reduction of fill. And so a couple of the cross sections here, if you navigation wise, going from 536 feet to 516 feet. It's about a 12-foot reduction in the width of the river. And for the other side, we have about, today it's about 545, and we end up with 515, which I think is a 30-foot reduction in the navigable width of the river. I'm going to pass it over to Dave now to talk about the cross sections and the work from the river group.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me okay? All right, so we're picking back up where we left off in August, right? So we had that last working group where we worked through a whole bunch of different iterations of the shoreline in the throat. So we'll talk about the throat first, then we'll go to the park. So we looked at different options presented, lots of different ideas were brought to the table through those conversations. And we, in the ABC, presented this option here, which is sort of a culmination of a lot of different ideas that were discussed. And so this assumes the SFR lane reduction 10 feet, which we now know has occurred. So we've gained 2 feet from all the sections that we had been showing before this section was presented. This has a 6 foot 7 inch wide landscape buffer, a 14 foot wide bike path, 6 inch wide vertical curb separation, and an 8 foot wide pedestrian path. It has a planted shoreline, which is at a lower elevation than that path system, requiring about a 3 foot high retaining wall with a barrier rail. Some of the things that came out of this in the broader stakeholder comments had to do with ease of access for maintenance, getting down to that shoreline, and some difficulties with that. Underground storage that was discussed here was pretty close to the water table, so the opportunity for infiltration was minimal. And then some discussion around what is the optimal approach to that buffer between the paths. So if we go to the next slide, what we've worked on in this intervening period was coming up with a preferred plan. And this really tries to balance all of the different opinions and ideas and contributions that came out of these meetings. So this is a plan view of it split into two parts. This is about a 1,500 linear foot stretch of the shoreline. It's a typical width of 40 feet. So this is an offset of 40 feet from the back of the guardrail on SFR. It has a planted shoreline, separated paths. On the top left is a segment of the path that rises from the shoreline area up to the park elevation. So it's about a 3.5, 4 foot rise. In that stretch, a wall is required to hold up that grade change, but that wall, we've been able to locate it within land and not require fill in the river or require that wall to be in the river. So there's always a treatment at the base of that wall along the river's edge. The eastern end, we have our separated path system. It has to transfer into a shared path as it goes under the BU bridge and the rail bridge, and tying into the existing condition, which is a 12-foot wide shared path. So our path narrows to a 12-foot wide path as it goes under the bridges and merged into the existing condition at the edge of our project site. So we're going to go to the next slide is going to be a section of the bottom condition, which is generally our typical shoreline treatment. So here we have, again, this is a balancing because we've tried to do our best to balance all the different parameters we're trying to do. So we have a 6.5 foot wide landscape buffer at the edge of SFR. We've incorporated what's called silvocells. These are like underground structure that provides rooting space, additional root space for trees to help prevent roots from, upheaving the pavement, but also getting a healthier root environment for the trees. A 12-foot wide bike path, a 1 foot wide sloped granite curb, which we think might be a little bit better transition between the two. It's not a quick step off. Then we have an 8 foot wide pedestrian path. And we have taken that extra 2 feet we gained from the lane reduction and shifted it to the shoreline area. So we now have a 3-to-1 slope. So down to the sheet pile wall, which is holding all this up. And so we have a planted natural shoreline, which is at a slope that DCR thinks is appropriate for their maintenance team to get access to. There's no railing at the top requiring it. So this is what we think is our best approach to balance all those different opinions. No walls in the river, always a planted shoreline. The paths are closer together than they were before, and we have our buffer at the edge of SFR. On the next slide is the condition where we have a wall. So just a real quick, it's the same sort of general path approach. We have a wall that's, as the path rises, it's getting supported. And this is cut at a narrow section where there's riprap being proposed at the toe of that slope. Again, it's not filling the river. This is within the existing footprint of land. It's a very inaccessible location. That's why there's not planting being shown at this exact spot. But generally, where there is greater width, we can begin to introduce planting again. So we can go to, now we're going to shift to the park. These were two different park plans we had presented. They each had sort of a central lawn or circle that was intended to gather all the different modes of transportation and sort them out and make a central sort of viewing spot. Had some secondary lawn areas. It had above ground storage for stormwater. Some of the concerns we heard was that the conflicts of bike paths and pedestrians was not resolved well. It could be improved, and as could creating a more comprehensive, cohesive park design, and simplifying some of the maintenance from DCR's perspective as well. So next slide. This is a sort of, again, it's gonna be hard to digest all the details of this at this scale, but we have created a central lawn that is at the meeting point of all the pathways. We have separated all the bike paths and pedestrian paths, and we focused on resolving those intersections in a much more hopefully safer and logical way. There's a number of different spaces that you can begin to use this park at. So it's a central lawn flanked on either side by different overlooks or opportunities to get closer down to the river's edge. And And this also shows the Agganis pedestrian bridge coming over the roadways to a overlook moment where it then branches off in two directions down into the park. And so we're incorporating that design into this park design. Stormwater, as it's currently designed, is all underground infiltration. So there is not large scale above ground basins collecting stormwater. And then at the western or the northern end, but on the page left, is the path system does need to transfer back into a shared path to tie into the River Street Bridge at that intersection. So we go to the next slide, it zooms into the middle. Just to give a sense, I don't have a, Jim, if you could guide the intersection of the bike path here. So here we're trying to separate some of the uses of the bike paths and pedestrians in a way that reduces some of the conflicts that were identified before. In where the section A cuts through, there's a row of shade structures kind of arcing out, looking out over the lawn and over the river. This is in a bend in the river, so this is going to be a pretty interesting and appealing spot to be at. And this is at an upper level. We kept these grades higher, so you kind of have these long distance views. Where section B is going to be cut, which I'll show you in a second, that lawn, that crescent lawn, is at a lower elevation down by the river's edge. So you have a little bit different experience of using the park and getting away from some of the uses that are happening at the upper elevation. And section C is going to cut through that overlook of the Agganis pedestrian bridge and then a slope lawn down to the river's edge. And this always maintains 14-foot wide bike paths, 8-foot wide tree line buffer, 8-foot wide pedestrian path. In that central lawn area, we did widen that pedestrian path to 10 feet just because there's going to be a more denser, higher number of people in that location. So we're trying to accommodate those higher numbers. Okay, last slide is just the sections, A, B, and C. Again, hard to scale, but top one was that overlook, that central lawn, higher elevation, looking out over the river, sort of like a small promenade, right, that you can kind of get up and over and look. That section B in the middle is where we have that sunken lawn a little bit closer to the river's edge, a little bit away from the upper pass system. And you can also see a little bit of the Agganis Bridge in section. There's part of that will be on the structure where there's lots of space beneath it, but where it gets close to the ground, it'll be on fill. So there's no space to get underneath. And this sort of demonstrates that in this section. And finally, the last section, the bottom, shows that overlook opportunity, shows where that pedestrian bridge is on the structure, where there is space below. So we've taken advantage of that space for park uses. So hopefully, we have addressed a lot of the concerns or issues and comments that were raised in both the shoreline and the park design, and we're happy to take any questions.
Task force members, yes.
Hi, Kane Larin, Charles River Alliance of Voters. Mark, you mentioned dredging. Can you talk about that?
Yes, there's Jim, go back to one of the river slides. Any of the sections will do. The section, yeah. I just want to say, looking for the sheet pile wall. So there's a proposed sheet pile wall here. In final condition, it's cut off, but when it gets put in, it's going to isolate the area that needs to be dredged. So the dredge sediments will be contained within the upland area. There'll be, of course, a silt boom or something while the sheet pile wall is being put in, but all that dredging will be done basically in the dry. It's still dredged because it's below mean high water, but the dredge will be done in the dry to keep the sediments from being disturbed and flowing into the river.
Okay, that's helpful. And I think overall, like, this is a huge improvement from where we started on the shoreline. It's great to see vegetation along the edge, and that the wall, the sheet pile wall is sort of below our low water mark. And that affords a lot more safe egress if you go in the water. I think it's just a better design overall. So I'm encouraged to see this. I'm a little concerned about what the infiltration is going to look like, since it for most of that stretch, it looks like we don't have anywhere for water to really soak in too much. And so I have some concerns about that running into the river. But overall, I think that this is a huge step forward from where we were at the beginning of last summer.
And so the path is sloped to the middle there, and you can show the drainage structure that runs down the middle to keep the water from flowing into the river. So the shoreline between the path and the river will flow into the river, but the paths are directed inward to that drainage structure in between the two.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Right.
Sorry, you mentioned that you were going to be dealing with, did you say 12 outflow? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you'll be doing with this? And by the way, I agree with Kane. This is such an improvement. It's really heartening. But how about the overflow, the outflows?
Yeah, there's 12 in the throat. There's many more along the whole.
Right.
And
Just
they're
tell us.
basically right now they're catch basin to outfall, no treatment. In the future, we have to meet stormwater standards to get our wetlands permit, which is a good thing. And so all that is treated. A lot of it's directed to the park where there's space for underground chambers to store them and be treated there. So we will meet mass stormwater standards, which are quite high. And so we're going to collect a lot of the outfalls, combine outfalls, collect the water, combine the outfalls. So you get a great reduction in the number of outfalls.
So will the treatment be similar to that is going on the other side of the river at Magazine Beach, at the city of Cambridge on that side?
I suspect they have to meet stormwater standards also
Yeah.
because they
Oh,
get
yeah.
a wetland permit, then we're in the same.
So you'll have, but there won't be a separate treatment plant? Everything is going to be done
Not treatment.
underground?
Well, there'll be deep sump catch basins and they'll be combined. I don't know, Jim, anything else we can, yeah, we are combining a lot of the outfalls, but all of it will be treated before it enters the river. Yeah, we're removing most of them. Hope that helps.
Breadon Carney, Walk, Massachusetts. I just want to say I really like this image and what you're doing here. It's very responsive to what was worked on in the working group, and that A Better City really had led on with that. So thank you for doing that. Especially like that there's continued separation here for people walking and people biking. I think that's especially important with more and more micro-mobility devices out and about, so that the separation between different speeds is great. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Max Rome from the Charles River Watershed Association, and I live right around the corner in Allston. Also support that these designs are just a lot clearer and the conversation is really moving forward. We're talking a lot about, the pedestrian bicycle experience, but I just want to, bring into the conversation that the riparian corridor, the area around rivers, is of absolutely critical importance for the ecology and the habitat within our river. The state has climate goals. We also have biodiversity goals. And what we know is that basically what happens in the first 35 to 200 feet of a river has a huge, huge effect on the organisms that are able to thrive and survive in the river. So kind of one general comment and then one specific comment. Where we at the Watershed Association hope to see this project going is moving into this kind of ecological parkland space. How do we not plan for, lawns and shade structures, but plan for, meadows and functional meadows? Subsurface infiltration is excellent, but surface infiltration practices that support wet meadows and the kind of biodiverse wetland community that was here, before we built these roads, before we dammed the river, that's really, really important. And in the throat, a very simple example of this is where does the vegetation meet the river. That's critical for butterflies and moths, and for damselflies and dragonflies. These are organisms that basically in New England are supported by wetland vegetation. A lot of them need to, in order to reproduce, they need to find a stock of vegetation that's growing out of the ground. So we have to improve the condition in the Charles River. We cannot have stone walls at the river's edge. We have to have a gradual transition from land into the water that supports vegetation. It's called, littoral vegetation beneath the water level. So I think that this design is compatible with that, but it's not in the design yet. And then I have one question, which is, what is your understanding of what the mitigation requirements are for the impacted river corridor?
We'll be doing improvements to the bank all along the river. We're impacting the throat, but what we put back along the river is better than what's there today. And what we're doing in the park area is we have an opportunity to regrade that slope. Right now it's a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 slope, which isn't great for habitat or anything. We can soften that to a 5-to-1 slope, vegetate it. It's connected to the river. It's creating flood storage. And so there's a lot of advantages that since we can soften that slope in the park area, make a lot of big improvements. From a fill standpoint, it's likely that the Army Corps will require, through their permitting process, they usually do an in lieu of fee. They don't require mitigation on site for the project like this. MassDOT would donate to, or not donate, they would pay into the in lieu of fee program run by Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife.
David?
David Loutenheizer at MAPC. I want to ask a question I've asked before in a different way. The Streets blog article today effectively showed the CWRA images of travel lane reductions of 2 lanes or 4 lanes in the cross section. Based on the earlier discussion we had today, has MassDOT or could MassDOT look at travel lane reductions and what TDM measures could be done in terms of increased transit service to actually accommodate a reduction in 2 or 4 lanes, and with that, what's needed to allow that to happen, and with that you have a lower cost project. You avoid the fill. You can do the river's edge, the discussion that was mentioned with CWRA. And create a better project. And again, I think if we back calculate, if we take away 2 lanes, what are the measures that could be done to actually accommodate that in an effective way? Thank you.
So this is Mike Hall from Tetra Tech. I can attempt to respond to that. We have taken a look at lane reductions on I-90. This is something we did in the 2022 NPC as well, and that analysis has been updated to reflect the latest 2050 numbers. And the results and conclusions are the same. It would result in multiple hours of congestion on I-90 if the highway was choked down through the throat area from 4 lanes to 3 lanes each direction. The latest data also shows that beyond just being in a peak period issue, it would be the volumes would exceed the capacity of the highway, a 3-lane highway, even during the midday hours. So the AM peak period from the model is 7 to 10 a.m. and the PM is 4 to 7 p.m. But even the time period between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., which would be the volume would be exceeding the 3-lane capacity. So there'd be, no one knows for sure but what the congestion would look like. Certainly, backups, queuing. It could be anywhere in the range from 7 to 10 hours a day. So it's just pretty significant impacts. And it's not just a convenience factor. I think it's important for us all to remember as well that congestion like that on the highway also affects emergency vehicle response times. And this is the primary evacuation route. I-90 is from the city to the west, and that would permanently choke down the capacity of the highway to function as a evacuation routes should it be an emergency that required evacuation of the city.
Yeah,
Sure.
Maybe you're hearing what I'm hearing. That wasn't actually the question. Sorry. I just want to make sure we're answering the question that was asked, and we're aware of that modeling, and I think we want to understand if you then took the additional step of transit demand, demand management to say how much more transit, what other mitigation measures might we include in order to accommodate this lane reduction and not have that outcome. That's, pretty standard modeling, and we'd like to understand if MassDOT took that step.
Okay, I just want to say a couple of things that having looked at the traffic data and the demand current and future, we are not contemplating reducing lanes on an interstate highway that also serves as a major evacuation route. Artificially constraining a highway or any other infrastructure as a means of forcing congestion that would in turn force people to transit is typically not the way we do it. We try to expand the choices. I know in this project, we have a number of transit and train opportunities, but as Rose correctly pointed out, it isn't infrastructure that drives demand, land use drives demand, and trying to force infrastructure to squeeze itself down as a means of reducing demand typically just pushes that demand elsewhere. It doesn't reduce it.
If this is a good time, we have some written comments and then also one question. So I can't really read the room. So if it's a good time for me to read those out, I think I would.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Again, meeting time management check. Okay, so we are at 7:35. I'm assuming that there might be some people who are also interested in hearing some responses to the layover. Okay, got some people there. Same as last time. Any comments that feel like have not been able to be brought up as part of this topic, please put in the chat, or prior topics, that's fine too. Or if anyone in this room has a question that they weren't able to get to on these topics, please write them down and hand them to me. We'll capture them. But we would like to get to the point of responding to the layover open items from the last meeting.
Almost every single comment that has been made tonight is a comment that's been made at prior meetings, months or years in the past. And it's just very frustrating that we keep saying the exact same things and hearing the exact same responses and getting the exact same results. And the response that you just gave, Luisa, is literally almost to the word the response that we got 6 or 7 years ago, which just is mind-boggling to me that in the decades of evidence that we have of induced demand and all of the other ways that infrastructure does in fact change transportation choices, it's just malpractice for people in the role that you're in to say that the design decisions that we make don't affect transportation choices.
I didn't say that. I said.
You said
Land use is the primary driver. And
if there is no highway there, no one's going to drive on the highway. If people want to take a train, but we don't have a train, then we can't take a train. The infrastructure does also drive choices.
And there's emergencies that can happen during the 6-lane construction period. There's evacuation that could happen during the 6-lane construction period. I genuinely think this is going to be a much bigger problem than you guys are anticipating. Everything keeps coming back to the modeling, to the lane issue. Some things don't, thankfully, and I do genuinely want to recognize the progress that has been made, but this is a continuing point that will just last beyond this meeting.
Okay.
First, I'd like to agree with everybody who's saying that what we're looking at tonight is much nicer than what we were looking at back at the boathouse meeting. So thanks a lot for all the progress. I think that's really important. Secondly, I think it's important to think about the condition during the construction. That is going to be the most stressful point. During construction, the turnpike is going to be 6 lanes, not 8. In order to build this, what's contemplated here, and I think it's very positive, is that fill in the river is allowing the pedestrian, bike, and riverfront environment to get better at the front end of the project. But it has to facilitate moving existing Soldiers Field Road toward the river in order to have enough room to sequence the construction, because this can't be done from a helicopter with toothpicks. This is a very tough construction job. And during that period, number one, the space is required, and I'm hoping and expecting that when we get to discussing the how to reduce the length of time that the Grand Junction closure occurs, there'll be a good look at the sequence that I think will illuminate some of these issues. But also on the modeling side, I think that the situation during construction, if the MBTA provides more frequency of service as well as more throughput, it's going to be very painful to go from 8 lanes to 6 lanes. And there's no room on Washington Street in my neighborhood. The bypass options are all full. So if there's a decent rail option, the mode shift will change. There'll be more mode shift during that 5+ years of construction. And the before and after modeling doesn't capture. It's the situation during that really has to get looked at. It has to get looked at from a physical point of view. I hope that'll happen when we look at reducing the length of time the Grand Junction availability is impeded. But it also needs to be looked at from a modeling point of view. And if you're going to want to improve the number of people, to allow the number of people who will want to use rail to do so, you want every train stopping at West Station. You don't want half of them bypassing. That's imposing a huge impact on anybody who wants to use public transportation. If all the trains stop, that's doubling the frequency from the effectively from the point of view of the people who are going to be dealing with this. So I think thank you for the progress here, but I really think that both the physical construction and the modeling have to look at that interim period. Thank you.
And there'll be certainly more discussion on the operations, ideally next month. So I am again going to remind everybody, if you have something you want to put in the chat or write down, please do that. I'd like to now turn it over to John Weston to do some of the layover follow-up. This is the portion of the meeting where we're not expecting that there's going to be discussion afterwards. That was anticipated. Anything that has a follow-up to the responses we'll handle either at the next meeting or in the interim. So John?
So yeah, right. Follow up on questions from our last meeting. Right. Just to go back a little bit, right. The layover analysis that we did, right, was to update a question or provide answers to a question that was asked, right. The last time a layover analysis was done for the Boston area was in 2013. Right, that was done to support the South Station expansion project. 24 sites were looked at, in the immediate Boston area, and that's really how we ended up with identifying a site, using the site at Beacon Park Yard, and incorporating it into this project. That was a long time ago, right? 2013, right? And a lot has changed in
our region's plans for transit, right? A lot of plans for growth. And so the question, where I'm getting to is, right, the question that was asked was, is there still a need for that same level of layover? And that's really what that analysis did. We got a lot of questions, right? We had a lot of questions in the meeting. We got a lot of follow-up questions. They came into two categories. One was questions specifically about the need, right? And these ones that are listed up on the slide are primarily like the ones that were, we got a couple of questions on those. And then more questions, honestly, we got more questions about alternative sites or different ways to use the site, we put it into not the need, but how do we address the need? So what I want to do first, right, and there was 3 main locations that we talked about last time. I didn't have good answers at the time, so I want to specifically talk about those three alternatives. Questions about the need that came up from a couple of different sources. One was a question about the incorporation of what's called the front yard into the analysis. The front yard is a portion of the Southampton, the Amtrak Southampton yard. And I'm going to say, unfortunately, we didn't call it out specifically in the analysis. It was in the analysis. It was all the numbers that are listed in that analysis for Southampton. The Southampton yard facility, it includes the front yard facility. Currently, it's Joe Barr here from Amtrak, and he'll correct me if I say anything that's not quite accurate here. But currently, Amtrak is working on making improvements at Southampton facility. The facility is made up both of layover tracks and maintenance tracks and maintenance facilities. They're making improvements to the maintenance facilities, which actually is taking up some of the layover tracks, right? And so, when they finish all that, there will be more, right? But there's a lot of, movement and shifting there. So the 23 number, right, which was capacity of 8, that's pretty small. It'll go up to 17 tracks once all that work is done. A combination of layover tracks and maintenance tracks that could be used for layover. There were questions about sort of this shift of inner core versus outlying locations. The plan, what people noticed was, right, a lot of the growth in layover is going to be within the sort of the inner core and within Boston, within the hub, right? So right now, optimally, right, especially as the T moves from the service they have now, right, which is focused on bringing people from outlying locations into the center city, right, it's going to be bi-directional all-day service. And so, right, the focus does need to be having an even space both in the city and at outlying locations. And that's really what we are planning for. Currently, the 28% of the space is in the core. In the future, it will be 52%, or that's what the analysis showed. There is some benefit to having, especially, and I'll go to the next one, especially when we talk about having spare train sets, having them in the center of the city, in the hub, is really important and efficient, right? So if something happens to a train, right, you want that spare train not down in New Bedford and Fall River, right? You probably want it in Boston, where it's more likely that you can dispatch it out to one of the 10 train lines that are on the site. So really more efficient to have a little bit more of your layover sort of in the hub, in the center of the layover facility, in the network. The need for spares, right? The question about spares and using spares came up from a number of different people, right? Currently, the MBTA has a 7% spare ratio. I'll say this, right? No one needs to respond to this, but that's impressive that they operate every day with that level of spares, right? The typical industry average is 20, somewhere in that range, 18 to 20. And that's really what they're planning for. And so those spare trains need to be stored somewhere. Those spares are I think I went over this before, right? A whole host of things, ones that are just are waiting, in case something happens. They're ones that are being serviced or repaired or that had wrecks, or, there's all sorts of different reasons why a train might be a spare, but a 20% ratio is typically good. We did, in the analysis, we did increase that to 30% over the period where we viewed where the Grand Junction outage was, planned. That was the best guess, right? We'll need a little bit more trains to be able to route them out through Air and Worcester, right? There's more on that to come, right? We're working on an analysis for that. That number may drop, but that, right? Well, that was just that temporary period during that, right at the time, right? That planned 6-year outage again, right? Again, right? We hope that we can get that down to months instead of years, and that need for the additional 10% spares would go away. In the end, in 2050, I think the need is still there for 105 spaces. It just in the interim time we'll work that out. As Fred mentioned, part of the trick here is all about the is during the construction phase. The approach to the layover shortage, the T and Amtrak, when there are shortages, there are a couple noted, they do what they need to do. They shuffle trains in between South Station and Southampton Street or other places. Not optimal. It is done because sometimes they need to do that. And then, right, there was a question about yard ownership, operating and maintenance. I guess I just want to say, right, Amtrak owns the Southampton Street facility. Other facilities like what would be at Beacon Park Yard, if that comes to be, right, that would be operated and maintained by whoever the railroad is. So not the MBTA. Right, they have a contract operator, Keolis currently. Amtrak would be MassDOT's contract operator for Compass Rail. So it would likely be one of the two of them, either Amtrak or Keolis, that would operate and maintain a facility. So next slide for the layover alternatives, right? A couple of questions came up. One about, I'm going to go first with the layover at Springfield. Springfield, there are two sites that, one site that MassDOT is doing a design on. We have preliminary engineering. That is to serve the Hartford line service that we sponsor with Connecticut that goes down to New Haven and to New York. The other is a commercial driver license training site that used to be a rail yard. The focus of that was the purchase of that was to focus on increasing service on the Valley Flyer, which is the service that goes up to Northampton and Greenfield. We did, looking at that, we did a whole big analysis with CSX about sort of the congestion in that area, remembering it's 100 miles out there, and really looking at the constraints. There's like 30 miles of single track between here and there, like trying to, I don't want to use train terms, right? Trying to run non-revenue trains that are laying over in Springfield and then trying to start in in Boston, really not functional. And right, there's, 14 to 20 freight trains a day that operate along that line by CSX. Trying to sort of weave through those is a challenge as well. So Springfield, not a functional, feasible site. South Station, there's some security concerns to using to laying over trains there. I know Amtrak does it from time to time. They have sort of a different scenario where they come and service trains at Southampton Street and then bring them back for an hour or two, right? Their timetables are different, right? When they leave in the morning and when they come back late at night, then the T. But the T's concern is really, a big concern is being able to, remember, you actually service trains at layovers. It's just not parking. So they can't really service a train at Southampton's, at South Station. And then there's security concerns about just leaving a train there overnight. I know Mike, or there's someone else from the here.
Hi, John. I'm actually here.
Yeah.
I can cover this last one. And good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Dominicus, Senior Director from MBTA Railroad Operations. Sorry I can't be there with you tonight, but happy to help answer some of these questions. Actually, going back to the first bullet, just to kind of piggyback on what John was saying, yes, on occasions, MBTA and Amtrak trains do lay over at South Station in various locations, depending on various occasions, depending on the schedule, service disruptions, other situations. However, it's suboptimal and really unsustainable for a variety of reasons. I just want to share some quick thoughts from our operations team.
I'm getting the eye, maybe 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. I'm sorry, I went over.
Oh. How much time do I have? Well, let me keep going really quick. So station platforms, they need to stay clear for early morning trains or other traffic. Leaving a train on the platform ties up valuable track space and can limit operational flexibility. Station platforms are more open to the public, as you just said, which presents potential safety and security concerns. Stations are not designed to function as secure storage facilities, especially overnight when staff presence is minimal. Trains should not depart layover facilities until they're ready for revenue service. Any morning mechanical issues at the station will disrupt service. A train stuck at the station is essentially isolated and challenging to repair. Labor facilities are located to allow efficient entry and exit to the mainline tracks at appropriate times. Keeping trains at the station require non-revenue deadhead movements to reposition trains. Labor facilities are designed for overnight storage with electrical hookups, cleaning, waste disposal, access to maintenance crews, which are not available at the station, and we don't have space there, unfortunately. Train crews and maintenance staff can more easily access multiple trains at layover facilities. It's important to consolidate labor functions at one location rather than in a variety of locations for crew travel, other considerations. Storage of trains at layover facilities allow for faster recovery times from disruptions. If there are issues in the yard, there's spare equipment nearby. There's several other reasons, such as noise impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, but that's a pretty extensive list I just want to share with this team.
Okay, Anthony?
Going on to the Middleborough Yard point here.
I'm going to say, Anthony?
Yep.
The meeting ends at 8 o'clock. Okay, so we've got, a couple of things I would like to suggest. One, I would like to suggest that we provide as a general update a summary of the responses that are being provided in layover, so people have a chance to digest it. It seems like it was very much sort of a rapid fire presentation tonight, and I'd like to suggest that we get that out to the team. That's number one. Number two, I'd like to have Luisa talk a little bit about sort of the plan moving forward for how to address layover while concurrently, advancing the environmental documents.
Okay, that makes sense. We can provide all this in writing afterwards. I think John did a good job covering the other topics, so thank you.
Anthony, thank you very much. That was really helpful, and we look forward to sharing the rest of your presentation with the group. And I just want to thank everybody tonight on behalf of MassDOT for your constructive engagement with this, and I'm sure Beth will have closing remarks. We did hear loud and clear your desire for more transit alternatives, rail alternatives, reducing demand on the roadways. We do understand that. We recognize that we might not always agree on what drives the demand. Some believe it's the infrastructure itself, but it's also part of the land use driven. But regardless, we hear the need and desire for more transit service. And from our view, that also requires the supporting infrastructure to make it all work. And in our view, what really drives demand to transit and rail is safe, reliable, and frequent service. And I know my colleagues at the T Rail and Transit, Amtrak and others are working really hard to provide that. As I've mentioned before, we're continuing on the plan outlined by Secretary Tibbetts-Nutt's memo in November about the filing of the draft. That includes 4 tracks. However, as all of you know, since that time, we have put forward a proposal for your consideration, and we will reflect that in the draft document, that if we were able to find a sufficient location in Boston for 2 of the tracks, we would be proposing 2 tracks at Beacon Park Yard. We would further commit not to build them until certain thresholds were met. Some of you have expressed skepticism that rail was really coming. We believe it is. We're planning for it, but we agreed, put our money where our mouth is and not install those tracks until agreed upon thresholds were struck. So that is our plan for filing this summer. And in the meantime, we are continuing discussions with our colleagues at the City of Boston to see if there are other locations that might fit. So we will continue that work while preparing to file as laid out last November, but we will include text in the draft documents, sort of documenting and describing the progress that we think we've made in looking for alternate locations, our commitments on reducing the number of tracks if sufficient capacity can be found elsewhere, and our commitment not to build the tracks until the train service was actually coming. So we will have further information about that at the next meeting, but we wanted to keep you updated on where we stood now.
So in the interest of time, we will, Harry. I was going to suggest that the MBTA portion, which was a few slides here, that we defer that to our next meeting. I certainly recognize that there's more that we can do on the team side in terms of presenting, in terms of dominating time, that there's more time needed for discussion. Fewer slides, more discussion. So we're certainly going to improve upon that as we move forward. I think we covered more ground, but I'm not sure to the depth that necessarily people would have wanted to have for that discussion. A couple of things that I wanted in terms of committing to, again, report back on is one, I think that the open item about the sensitivity analysis of the model relative to parking. That's one. Also notionally, the Cambridge Street corridor in terms of how that maybe plays a different role beyond just a local street as more of a collector. So Cambridge Street, modeling and parking. And I would like to, let me finish my summary and then I'll come right to you. And then the third thing being just confirmation that the model reflects the proposed MBTA service plans. Again, there seems to be maybe a slight disconnect between maybe, the assumptions about what the transit component of that is.
Can I clarify? That's not.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe to sum up a lot of what was here tonight, which is a step we are trying to get to. And I would say this, I would like to say this is not Stacy Thompson speaking, but at least 2/3 of the state task force is that we would like to work with the MBTA. We're excited you're finally in the room with us. We've asked for many years for you to join, so we're excited that you're here to talk about the transit that is needed, because our understanding is that the transit that is currently modeled is not sufficient for the needs based on the land use. That is the critical step we would like to ask for.
Correct the RTC plan.
Yeah, we can talk about that next time. Okay, all right, yes.
Jessica.
Thank you. The other piece that what we didn't put such a fine point on earlier, but was the underlying theme of the discussion earlier, is that many of us have a hard time believing the transit results that you presented. And so part of that is looking at what we're doing for parking. Part of that is looking at what we're doing for MBTA service. But I would also like to see the mode share that is assumed for all of the land uses that are projected in 2050. And I would like to see that compared to other similarly dense areas that exist today, like Kendall Square and the Seaport and other places like that. And what is the current mode share in those locations? Because I'm just have a really hard time believing that we're gonna have the new people getting on a train in Beacon Park Yards where we have millions of square feet of new development happening. I have a hard time believing that that's gonna be the same number of people that currently today get on the train at Breadon Landing, which has much less development surrounding it. You have like one layer of large buildings and then it's like triple deckers. So that mode share piece of it would be really important to see as well.
Yeah, clarifying question.
Thanks. No, I think, sorry. Yeah, exactly, right? So it's a great framing of it and thinking of it in terms of other areas of the region and those comparisons. And so what I wanted to emphasize is because we've represented it in a model, so we're not asserting assumptions of mode share is this split and that's going to change for this because, you know, it kind of should go that way. They're represented. It's abstract, right? It's not reality, but we have transit represented by frequencies, the stop locations, the alignments. So what I'd like to come back with is not just the mode share, but also what's behind the mode share. So where are the trips by purpose coming from and going to, right? There's development happening all over the region by 2050. So I think bringing in that, and also a really important piece to this is that it's not just one station for the study area. It's not just West Station. Those shuttles are incredibly frequent, 5-minute shuttle headways versus a 30-minute commuter rail. You know, the shuttles are also free and they're representing in the model. So that all goes into what we call our utility, right? How we are measuring the attractiveness of transit versus walking, biking, using auto, which has a parking price associated to it. So I think there's a really great opportunity here to leverage the model to help build that understanding of where these things are coming from. And then I think when we're thinking of, you know, potentially different solutions or mitigations, again, we can leverage the model for that. The model's not telling us what it is, but it does have more to say than just the output number.
Happy to see more information, but can we also see the mode share?
Yeah, yes. With context.
Okay, so good. So good. So that's something that can be provided. Lastly, in terms of, this is somewhat a list of topics for potential future meetings. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Some of this, there's not dates tied to this, but again, task force members have reached out. And we've made certain commitments about, you know, the team has about an IMR briefing, about coming back on the Grand Junction Rail. So if there's other topics that you think beyond this family, please let me know.
I'd like to thank you
Seth.
for facilitating.
Okay. I'm going to say this, please let me know after the meeting.
That felt like an open.
I broke out.
Okay.
And I thought it was because there'd be opportunity to comment on layover. Is the next meeting going to include the ability for people from the public to ask questions, further questions and comments about the layover?
Yes. Yes.
Consider moving layover up higher on the list. No disrespect to any of the conversation that has been included.
And the fast tracks need to be included in that discussion.
Yeah. Say again?
The bypass tracks, we keep not talking about.
Yes, that's part of the rail discussion. Yes. Grand Junction outage.
We'll take questions on layover, but we are moving forward. As I said, we're talking with the city of Allston. We are confident in the layover analysis. We've answered many questions about it and has been it looked at and approved by 3 entities that are operating rail service in the Commonwealth, Rail and Transit Division, Amtrak, and the MDTA. So we understand that people don't want layover, or many people in this room don't want layover in Beacon Park Yard. The layover analysis, after going through months of rigorous review, answering many questions, does conclude that layover is needed. Many of you have talked about the need for additional rail and transit service. And as I mentioned, that does bring in the need. You can't have that service without the supporting infrastructure. So we're happy to talk about the location, but we really would like to continue looking for location for needed layover to support what everybody agrees is a need for additional rail service throughout the Commonwealth.
And I will stay after, again, if there's comments that didn't get addressed that you had, there wasn't time to do, I'll stay after. You want to, let me know. Also, any other topics. So I'll be here for a bit. And task force members all have my contact information. So if you don't think about it today, reach out anytime. Okay. And with that, we'll close the meeting 8:10. We'll do better next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.